If you ever find yourself in a toxic workplace like I did, as many of us go through these toxic places, whether you have undermining employees and peers that are cutting down every one of your positive contributions, managers that are micromanaging, schedules that have you constantly working, burning the midnight oil, and unfortunately not spending enough time at home, and work-life balance we know is going away. Have you also maybe possibly been to a doctor's and they've said your stress levels are rising, blood pressure is rising? What's going on? Are you feeling okay? Only by your response by saying, I don't know, I'm not feeling well, I'm depressed. And I think a lot of it stems from my workplace. Well, guess what? You're not the only one. And sadly enough, there's a few ways and a few steps that I even took, and many people are going to take this year in 2026 as people start to realize that life is worth much more than your job, a title, a paycheck. In fact, we all need money to live, but let's be honest, a lot of us are starting to come to the realization, unlike many generations before, that a job is important, but it's not everything. Work-life balance, family, health are number one. And living your best life, in fact, is the best way to go. So in 26 here, these are some classic steps, and many of these steps I have taken myself that are going to transition you outside of a toxic work environment. The first step really is the thought about, I deserve better than this. You feel better about yourself, and at some level, you get down in the dumps, you have bad, performance reviews, you have a manager that's constantly seems to be isolating you, pushing you around, challenging you with issues that you can't even do. They don't necessarily even help you with removing those hurdles, which generally good managers often do, and that's kind of their place, is to support their workers. But if you find your peers are getting the support they need, they're getting the opportunities, they're getting the travel, they're getting those special projects, and you're getting none of it. You're getting stuck at home base, taking care of the old fuddy-duddy. You're not getting any of the positive experiences and opportunities. You're starting to think to yourself, you know what, enough is enough. I deserve better than this. And I truly did feel that way. I was starting to transition that way in my own mind, because I was starting to see that, in my workplace. And you know what? Everybody gets a fair shake. I mean, ideally in a perfect work environment, fair is a conversation about feelings, but equitable and a thought that everybody's being treated with the fair shake. Everybody gets 5 sticks. Everybody gets 1 stick. And you know what? Everybody has an opportunity to make the most of it. Sure, after a period of time, a lot of work environments, people start proving themselves to be maybe a little less capable, at which point then a performance conversation is due. But when performance conversations result in just nickel and dime and washing dirty laundry, like a lot of us actually have had in the past, then you start to realize, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. I'm better than this. I'm better than the manager that I'm reporting to, because what do? They took a few courses, they shook a few hands, they put on some fake smiles, and they just look cheesy with those cheap shorts and pants and those pointy shoes that they bought at that cheap department store. Now they feel that they have the look, the part, and they're going to play the part, and they're going to throw everybody under the bus, including their own reports, just for the sake of trying to move their own career upwards. But once you realize that, and I found that too, is, moving to a place where in your state of mind that you're better than that. I deserve more than this. And it doesn't mean more money. It just means better treatment. I mean, we have to have self-respect. And that's something that clearly, a lot of us lack. After a while, we get beat down year over year, and performance reviews keep pushing us down, telling us what we're not doing right, what we're not doing good enough. And all of a sudden, eventually, we start believing it. Talk about a toxic workplace. I mean, we all live that, not all of us, but many of us live that environment. And if you find yourself in that space and finally coming to that realization, like many are now in this year, that we're just simply worth more than that. We're better than that. Well, that's the first step that a lot of us have to take, is that acceptance that, we have more value. We have more self-worth. And truly, we're important. We may not be important to that clown manager, but we're important to somebody. Whether we're important to your spouse, your husband, your wife, you're important to your kids, maybe your parents, maybe you're just important to yourself. Whatever, there's some self-worth that we need to recognize, and poor treatment in a toxic work environment is definitely one of those things that you have to recognize. That's the first step. The second step is documenting everything. And, as I start to transition, I realize that, a lot of it is CYA. a lot of it is understanding that a lot of times these companies set you up for failure. And when you start seeing things like that, when you start to see these conversations about, poor performance results, well, you know what? One thing that can be done, and I've seen this done in the past, if you get a poor response, and this will shake some feathers, but remember, you're trying to transition out of such a toxic environment anyhow. The point is, stand up for yourself, feel good about it, and document everything. See, documentation is key. Save those emails. Or even if you have a bad performance conversation, respond after, an hour later. Well, thank you very much for our performance conversation. I really appreciate that. But you said this, that, and the other. But you know what? In actuality, this is how it went. At this time, this is when our meetings went. Save those conversations. Save those critical emails that are definitely going to either hang you out to dry or, more importantly, are going to point that, you know what, maybe you should be able to clear yourself, protect yourself. Because a lot of times people don't keep enough information. Emails are king. And protect yourself with, documentation, or protect yourself in a way that gives you the upper hand. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to try to keep you and maintain your job. Remember, ultimately, you want to get out of this work environment. One of it could be just leaving. One of it could be in a place where, let's be honest, you want to paint a picture of a toxic boss or toxic peers. Ultimately, as we've said before, a strong defense is an amazing offense. And if you have the information that protects you and, displays what some of the drawbacks and some of the negativity and toxicity, or those bad emails, or those emails that possibly shouldn't be or aren't generally appropriate, whatever it is, whether it's hard copy, soft copy emails, save that information. But also what I've seen is a lot of these companies, they do their scrubs, their IT scrubs, and they can go in after the fact and they can just wipe everything out. And all of a sudden you're thinking, I had that email somewhere, it's gone. Absolutely. They can eliminate that. If you're suspecting that you're on the receiving end of some harsh treatment, believe it or not, this in fact could happen. So protect yourself. Forward it off into places. Print it off. Do something, in other words, that you're able to actually protect and keep some of that documentation. Protect yourself with those documents like your performance reviews. If need be, possibly escalate. If you feel that your manager is unfortunately mistreating you, I've seen this done before. Escalate it to their manager. Now, if their manager's on board and they're a big driver as to why you're getting this mistreatment, well, your days are done and you're snookered. But at the end of the day, the point isn't sticking around and trying to maintain a job that's toxic. The point is transitioning out of this. Just making sure that you have your ducks in a row, that you've been doing all the right things, because you never want to leave in a condition where a company has some sort of hand over you, where they're going to push you out the door. Rather, a lot of these companies play passive aggressive, and they'd much rather you leave, but they'll passively aggressively push you out the door. And in such a way, you want to make sure you have the documentation. Just protect yourself as best as possible. Another point that you really have to consider, and a lot of us live through this, is learning how to say no without guilt. A lot of us, unfortunately, you don't want to say no. The boss asks you to work late. The boss asks you to do a special project. The boss asks you to do this. And quite often you just feel guilty for not saying it. So a lot of us go through it. But we know sometimes in these toxic environments, you feel even more under scrutiny. You feel like you're even more pressed to perform. You're even more pressed to try to outshine your peer. Why? For fear that you might lose your job. And a lot of us are stuck with that, that shadow bearing down on us constantly, with that fear that we may not have that job. And unfortunately, a lot of us just get stuck in that whirlwind of just not saying no. But there's a guilt that ties to that. There's a guilt that you might lose your job. If you lose your job, how are you going to deliver that with your spouse? That's something that we always lived with. I've lived with that, having that guilt and not being able to say no. But I'll be honest, and part of that was my journey, my transition, and my transformation down the proverbial exit door. And honestly, for right reasons. I started to come to the realization that, these companies, they don't treat, they're giving people, newbies coming in, more money, what's going on, they're getting the better treatment. And sometimes you see this and there's nothing you can do about it. You try harder, you work later, longer, you do extra projects, you join committees. A lot of us do that. I've done that. just for the sake of trying to shine, trying to, better yourself, trying to climb that ladder, and then find yourself, well, what was the point when that person's leaving early, showing up late constantly, or maybe they're not showing up at all, or maybe they're only there for 2 to 3 days a week, and you're like, what is going on? And yet they're getting these opportunities. There gets to be a point, as which many of us find, that it's just in time to let it go. Let it all go and move on. But once you hit that point, and I saw that point, that tipping point for me was several years back, where all of a sudden I started to have this realization that it didn't matter what I did. I showed up late. I took the calls when I wasn't on call. I'd be sitting at home. I'd get calls from my team. Hey, Mark, how does this work? How do we do this? We need help here. And I would be willing to support the team because honestly, I really did take it very, very to heart. And I would support my team, and I did help, and I did answer those calls after hours, and I did all those things that went well above and beyond, but it was never recognized. And so I started to realize that what's the point in all of this? I'm doing all this extra stuff, this work, these projects, this help, doing extras that my peers, lights out, taillights and dust, their phones are off as soon as home time. And yet I'm taking calls for, other people. I'm taking calls for other supervisors and other team members when in fact they have people that they can be reporting to, and yet I'm the one taking the calls. I started to realize the unfortunate part is once you start doing that, you've risen the bar. So now you step back a notch and you retract. It doesn't matter if your coworkers, your peers are down here, they just stay down here. But if you yourself rise your bar over time, and all of a sudden you find yourself, well, no, I'm not having it. You just notch back one level. You're still way ahead of these players. The point is they now see that as retracting and pulling back, and they see that now, and they're going to use that against you in a performance conversation. That happens all the time. That's about as toxic as it can get, where now they're leveraging your guilt to ensure that you're going to continue pushing harder and harder and harder. And they're utilizing carrots by saying, in your performance chats about, well, you had a great year, but you just got to work on this piece or take that and they always have a caveat. Now they'll say, well, we always have to throw a little constructive criticism in there and a little bit of, increase in productivity, a level that we can work on. There's always got to be something we can work on. But it's always pretty big and monumental. When you're in a toxic environment or toxic relationship with your boss or peers, your go-tos, your improvement plans look more like a performance improvement plan. Not written in such a formal way, but once you see a PIP, a performance improvement plan, that's usually the first sign you're on the way out the door. Unfortunately, working harder, faster, longer, taking on more projects is not going to save you at this point. And retracting even just that one little bit because you finally realize that, life's more important and getting home on time to see your family is more important. Once they see that you've pulled back even a hair, your days are numbered. And that's the sign that it's definitely time to continue your journey out the door. Another step that I found in my journey and my departure from the corporate lifestyle, and many of you will likely see that and start to experience this, is don't feel guilty. Don't feel guilty about not wanting more. See, that's what sometimes drives us, and it's okay to want more, to strive for the moon, to create that big goal, to improve yourself and improve your goals and your career objectives. It's okay to do that. It's okay to want things. But remember, you're the slave to things that you want. What's the justification for moving up? Is it because you love challenges? That's great. That's one positive reason. But if your goal is to move up the ladder so you can make more money, have a bigger title, buy a bigger house, buy that fancy GM truck with the AT4 package, if that's your game and all you want to do is continue climbing the ladder because it might get you somewhere financially, or you want to be proud because you're wearing that badge, stop. Forget that. The guilt, do not carry that guilt. It's okay to want a little less. It's okay to have a paycheck and not worry about it having the biggest financial win that you can possibly imagine. So because ultimately, it's not just about that. It's about sometimes getting job search gratification. A lot of us enjoy our work. A lot of us enjoy what we do. But it's not until we're into an environment that's toxic, where we have bosses that are bearing down and we have peers that are undermining each other, We have just bad situations where sometimes they contrive, they get together, and once you have senior management, middle management, and they're all on that same page, which they usually are, there's no way to fix that. You could try to bypass your manager. Chances are they've already had a discussion with their boss, and next thing you know, it doesn't matter what you say. It's already been decided, and they've been having laughs and a coffee together outside on one of their lunch dates, and it doesn't matter. So ultimately, forget about the toxicity. You're not going to fix it. You can't fix the culture. You can't fix the toxic workplace. All you can do is protect yourself. And for me, protecting myself was more about transitioning out the door. And that whole idea of needing more, wanting more, I was starting to lose that passion. You know, as I lost my family, my mother, my father, I lost my dad in 21, I lost my mom in 24. As a lot of you are already aware, it's very, very heartbreaking. But when you're sitting by the deathbed of your parents, you start to come to this realization, what is these fancy cars and houses, and what does all of this really matter? The point is, it doesn't. And that's the point. The point is, sometimes it's okay to be satisfied with mediocrity. That's totally fine. Because at the end of the day, there's an ultimate equalizer, and it's usually about 6 feet under the ground. And so ultimately, it's okay to strive for the moon. It really is. And I was there for a while. But you do get to a point where all that toxic workplace just constantly beats you down, and you wonder, what am I doing all this for? You said to hell with it. Then you see things change in your life, and you see loss of family, and things start to change. And for me, I had that aha moment. I needed to make a change. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care about climbing a ladder. I didn't want to be part of committees. I wanted to come in at 7 o'clock, leave at 4:30, no muss, no fuss. The problem is, sometimes these companies pull you into the vortex, and you say, well, try to stay out of trouble. And I've had a lot of viewers say, well, just stay out of trouble, do your job, and go home. Sometimes these companies pull you into the vortex. They challenge you with issues that you can't be solved. They pull you in, they create more problems that you can't take care of. And unfortunately, sometimes they just pull you into a workplace that you can't avoid. I'd like to stay out of trouble, I always did. But unfortunately, some of these supervisors, managers create a problem, create a crisis for you. And now you have to try to solve it. I just wanted to do my job. I loved what I did until management, until politics and toxic workplace got in the way. The fifth part of the journey, and is generally getting a lot closer to leaving. Now, whether you're leaving on your own terms or the company, by this point, they see you retracting, they're seeing your attitude shift. Quite often, they'll push you out the door. And honestly, that kind of helped me out the door. That's exactly what happened. But whether you do it voluntarily or involuntarily, the point is having that evacuation plan. Don't just jump ship. A lot of people, sometimes are scared to make a move. But you know what? Rightfully so. Cost of living is high. People get scared. People need the money. I get it. But that's why in advance, this doesn't happen overnight. Over a period of time, you're realizing this toxic workplace. I've got to be transitioning my move. I've got to be thinking about, what am I going to do? Do you want to retire early? Maybe you have the finances in order. Talk to your financial people. Talk to your accountants and your bankers. And they'll help you whether you can actually afford to retire early. If not, what's your transition plan? Maybe you want to try an entirely new, different line of work. Maybe you're sick of this line of work. Maybe you're tired of this whole environment in the workplace. Maybe it's time to change a different style. Get some new courses, do some training, and try to learn a new skill. Maybe even start that little side hustle, that little business you've always been wanting and longing to do. Whatever it is, have that plan, have that evacuation plan. Do your investigations, do your checks, understand what you can do, how much you need, and if you can make it happen. There's always a way out. There's always a way to do this. You've just got to think about it and create a plan. I did, and I'm much better for it. Please do, again, everybody, I thanks so much for watching. Please do drop a line. I'd love to hear your thoughts on your evacuation plan, how you escaped a toxic work environment, or if you are one of those that are planning 2026 to be your year. Hope to see you, each and every one of you, real soon, everybody. Bye-bye.